Through Aristotle, Western philosophy receives a chronology of fragments from the earliest Greek philosophers in his work called the Metaphysics. These were Aristotle's writings on the abstract subject of the nature of being. The great mystery of being raised a number of questions in the earliest Greek thinkers. Was being a property of things? Was it a thing itself? Or perhaps neither of these, something else? Is being one, or is it comprised of many things? Does being change? Aristotle had his own thoughts on the subject, and he claimed that there were four causes. If we took the universe as an example, the first cause would be the material cause, the stuff the universe was made of. The second of Aristotle's causes is called the efficient cause, and it is that which brings the material stuff over the threshold from non-existence into existence. The formal cause, claimed Aristotle, was the idea that makes something what it is. The final cause was the purpose toward which all things of the universe moved. The earliest Greek philosophers were preoccupied with astronomy that was derived from earlier civilizations of the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. They were concerned with the material nature of being. The question was, of the great diversity of being, is there a single foundational principle? This is known as the problem of the one and the many. If the answer to that question is no, then it is only possible to know the different and separate things, one at a time. Knowing the larger whole would be impossible. If, however, there is a single principle that underlies being, the whole could be understood by apprehending the unifying principle. The Greek settlements were numerous, lining the waterways of the ancient Mediterranean and Black Seas. It's plausible that the ideas diffused from the older Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations, and perhaps as far away as the Indus River Valley. Thus the story of Western thought begins in Miletus. It is a city settlement steeped both in Egyptian and Mesopotamian cultures. The older mythologies had waned by this time, and the pantheons were giving way to new ideas that were increasingly abstract. Monistic tendencies had already been experienced in Egypt, describing the god Amun-Re as one in many forms. In the late Mesopotamian culture, the various gods were part of a single meta-god, and in India, cosmic being was both the universe and beyond, transcendent and immanent, maturing into a single principle of universal self called Atman. Thales then moved away from myth toward what we might call an infant science. The fragments of Thales are left to us from Aristotle. It seems that Thales taught a type of material monism, a single unifying substrate underlying all of matter. This foundational unity underlies all apparent differences. It is not surprising that his experience leads him to conclude this, as water changes its appearance and is observed throughout nature. More than that, the Egyptians had already maintained that the origin of existence was from a primeval body of water called Nun. There are references in the ancient texts of the Indians, the Rig Veda, that the birth of the world is out of water. Prajapati was born through devotion that heated the waters. So, when Aristotle notes that Thales thought the earth was a flat disk floating on the water. He added his own critique of the claim. Upon what does the water rest? He asks. While the observation that a magnet moves objects, Thales was then claiming that these objects had their own soul. And it seemed ludicrous to us today. But the credit we should give Thales is his view that the gods are not in charge of material forces, but nature itself contains forces of change. Anaximander, according to Aristotle, had a more sophisticated philosophy because he considered both the material and the efficient cause of being. Anaximander pointed out the flaw in Thales' claim of water as the material cause of being. First, Anaximander said, how can water produce the many things of our experience, such as air, fire, and earth? Secondly, those elements all have an efficient cause. Each has a beginning. Anaximander reasons that the underlying substance must have no beginnings. It must be a substrate, and if it has no beginnings, this implies eternity. Furthermore, Anaximander says the earth doesn't need any supporting material, as Thales' claim of water previously did. The earth, rather, was held in suspension, equidistant to all else, not moving, nor requiring any support. The uncreated, original substance that Anaximander called aporon had characteristics that were divine. Thus, claimed Anaximander, aporon was ageless, it was boundless and indeterminate. Aristotle said this description is much like a godhead that is divine, immortal, and indestructible. Aporon also had the meaning of ring or circle, and therefore is a line with no beginning or end. The source of worlds is aporon, but aporon is also that into which perishing takes place. This idea will later be compared with some schools of Indian thought. Anaximenes is the youngest of the Milesians, a student of Thales, and appears to take on his teacher's position of a monistic materialism. His claim is that air is the unifying principle of being. Air was thought to be the soul stuff, the carrier of consciousness. This innovation in his theory is that condensation and rarefaction produces changes in material. That is, air rarefied to produce fire, the stars, and the sun in the heaven, and condensed to produce water, and then over time the earth. Being is not just a substrate, but a process by which material changes its appearances. Air is also related to a soul, from which all life arises. Just as air fills and motivates life, so too air surrounds the earth. The universe, thus, is viewed as a living organism with divine qualities, a living God. The details of Pythagoras' life are somewhat mysterious. It was reported that he was a student of Anaximander. Although he was born on the Greek island Samos, he emigrated to Croton in southern Italy, perhaps for political reasons to avoid the tyrant Polycrates. In southern Italy, he practiced both mathematics and was influenced by Orphic mysticism. The Orphics practiced vegetarianism and believed in reincarnation. Pythagoras claimed, on the basis of memory alone, that souls transmigrated from humans to animals and humans to plants as well. Pythagoras was concerned with mathematics and believed that order was a form of underlying unity. Numbers were separate from one another, and things were structured ratios between numbers. So, numbers were not simply a representation of reality, but actually made the existence of things possible. Of particular significance was the number 10, for when placed in relation to each other, this formed an equilateral triangle, which when bisected produced two right triangles. Pythagoras is famous for his formulation of the theorem a squared plus b squared equals c squared. While Pythagoras is credited with the discovery that mathematical ratios have musical intervals, there is some evidence that these ideas may have diffused from ancient India. In the sacred text, the Rig Veda, there is a reference to numbers and the sound of the octave. The belief that numbers comprise the universe is applied in the architecture of the Parthenon. The numbers of columns along the length is odd, but along the width it is even. Thus, odd and even comprise the entire universe of numbers and the entire universe of being. The belief that numbers comprise the universe was an important step in mathematics. The ratio of numbers produced musical tone, most notably the length, width, and heights of the outer temple and the length widths of the cella form a pentatonic scale. Likewise, Pythagorean mathematics is used in the construction of the ionic volute of the column, whereby the hypotenuse of a right triangle is repeated in geometric progression. The hypotenuse becomes the short side of each juxtaposed triangle. Pythagoras understood the universe to be a balanced, harmonious whole. We receive the ideas of Parmenides through Aristotle on the same abstract subject of the nature of being. One key aspect of Parmenides' metaphysics is the claim that whatever one can think or name is being. He states, "Unbeing you won't grasp. It can't be done, nor uttered. Being thought and being are one." Note that thought and being true must be different in Parmenides' views, as we can think of fictional heroes without claiming they are unbeing. They are simply untrue. For example, Spider-Man is something fictional, as opposed to what Parmenides meant by unbeing. Parmenides, in his discussion of the way of truth, claims being is eternal. He can find no reason to say that the world came into existence at one moment versus earlier or later. Time, in other words, is characterized as a way of seeming. Likewise, being is continuous, for what would limit it? His conception of being as a sphere is a little unclear, for while it may be a unity, isn't a sphere bound? Well, he replies, "Naught is or will be beyond being's bounds, since destiny's decree fetters it whole and still. Zeno supported Parmenides' claims. Anything must pass through an infinite number of points to go anywhere, Zeno said. Since there is a slice of time needed for each thing to traverse those points, it would take infinite time to go anywhere. Zeno then claims that this rules out any understanding of time and motion whatsoever. These arguments of Zeno's supported Parmenides' claim of an unmovable eternity. Xenophanes was a monist as well, claiming earth was the unifying principle of existence. All things are from the earth, and to the earth all things come in the end. Another fragment claims, all things which come into being and grow are earth and water. Aristotle said of Xenophanes, looking at the whole world, he said that the One is God. Xenophanes disagreed with anthropomorphizing any notion of the divine. He said, the One thinks as a whole, hears as a whole, sees as a whole. This is a move away from viewing the divine as an external object. Rather, the divine is understood as a subject, and this can be compared to the Indian understanding of Brahman. In both Xenophanes and the ancient Indian view of Brahman, the divine moves the universe with his mind. The work of Heraclitus was innovative, a reflection on change. Heraclitus was named the enigmatic one, and Heraclitus the obscure. His famous fragment, "You can't step into the same river twice," points to the idea that all of the elements of the universe are in flux. He claimed that being was an ever-living fire, a process of constantly changing elements governed by logos, which in this case meant governed by reason. Being was too grand to be governed by anything other than reason. Reality was in a constant process of creation and destruction. The hidden opposing relations of elements were the dynamic forces of change. In this particular fragment, he might have meant that the extremes oppose each other, resulting in a justice, something we might call the middle way. It was Hegel much later in history that claimed every idea had an opposing idea, and through conflict a synthesis is produced, to be again posed by its opposite. This was Hegel's notion of evolutionary consciousness, which was proposed as movement of opposites as early as Heraclitus. In this sense that Heraclitus claims, history evolves. Empedocles was a pluralist. He claimed there were not one, but 4 elements: earth, air, water, and fire. Even the human soul, he thought, was comprised of these elements. It was this claim that he used to give an explanation of perception. The objects of the world were perceived because they were matched by those same elements in the sensory organs. All of thought and mind thus produced was the result of material interrelations. The material combination of things entered relationships on the basis of two forces, love and strife. In our modern-day physics, we might think of this as attraction and decomposition. The world is circular, and there are periodic cycles. All combinations were subject to cyclical change. Even the human soul was subject to the cyclical concept of history, as the transmigration of souls into animals was a form of punishment. It was evident that during this historical period, speculations regarding the soul's location in an afterlife were abundant. Anaxagoras is another pluralist whose metaphysics, by contrast with Empedocles, claimed there are no indivisible particles. All things were together, infinite, both in number and in smallness. And when all things were together, none of them could be distinguished for their smallness. Was this the earliest conception of a quantum field? Anaxagoras did make an important distinction between particles of matter and particles of mind. Nous, he claimed, is infinite and self-ruled, the finest of all things and the purest. The translation of nous here is an equation between mind and reason. Mind did not create matter, but acted upon matter. This was Anaxagoras' resolution to the problem of the one and the many. Democritus maintained that there were physical particles, and it is important to note that there is a difference between that of Anaxagoras and the particles of the atomist Democritus. Democritus claimed the fundamental particle was the atom. Yes, tiny, imperceptible, indestructible, indivisible, eternal, uncreated particles. They were infinitely numerous and eternally in motion. Democritus was also a moralist of his day, and most of his aphorisms point to the underlying assumption of chance in life. For example, one who is lucky in his son-in-law gains a son, and one who is unlucky loses a daughter. In his conclusions of life and happiness, he claims that true riches are goods of the soul. His admonitions took a middle path between deficiency and excess. Thrift and fasting, he claims, were good, but a life without feasting was like a highway without inns. This concludes our first lecture.